the webinar is complete. All right, once again, the name of our webinar today is Diversifying the Educator Workforce, Tools and Experiences from the Field. And what I'd like to do is introduce some of my favorite people to work with in this work, and you will meet each of them this afternoon during the presentation. I'd like to start off with Itai Mizrab, who is one of my distinguished colleagues at the GTL Center. Itai is a Senior Technical Assistant Associate with AIR, and he is the Equitable Access and Diversifying the Educator Workforce Lead. He is extremely passionate about this work, and I'm sure that you will see that as the webinar moves forward. We also have Betty Underwood, who's with us today. She is a consultant for the Lansing School District. And finally, we have Jamie Wilson, who is actually the Director of Human Resources for Reynoldsburg City Schools, and that is in Ohio. And she'll be sharing with you some of the things that they are doing within their local context to diversify the educator workforce in Ohio. I'll let them introduce themselves a bit further once their section of the presentation comes up, but be prepared for some really, really exciting and interesting and innovative ideas for what's happening in the field in their particular areas. If you had the option or the good fortune to attend our first session of this webinar series, you'll know that it was on Beyond Selection and Hiring, Diversifying the Educator Workforce by Eliminating Barriers and Creating Pathways Throughout the Pipeline. And during that webinar, we covered a lot of things. We took a look at the historical barriers to employment for teachers of color. We also had an overview from Dr. Constance Lindsay on the text that she co-authored titled Teacher Diversity and Student Success. We also had the opportunity to consider some policy approaches for ways to attract and retain a diverse educated workforce. And we highlighted the importance of students' exposures to teachers of color throughout their career as students. And finally, we gave you just a little tiny introduction of the GTL data tool, and we're going to expound upon that for you today during Itai's presentation in particular. Right? And with that, I will turn it over to Itai to talk with us a little bit about the GTL Talent Development Tool 2.0. Itai.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's fantastic to see everyone again. Thank you for logging in. I'm happy to share with you a little bit about the new tool today, the improved tool that we're sharing with the field. And I'm delighted for the participation, so many states and districts. It's wonderful. Looking forward for your engagement and questions as we move forward. Before I jump into that, I wanted to say a word about why are we so preoccupied in the GTL Center and this issue of diversifying the teacher workforce, and why we connected to our overall work on shortages and equitable access to teachers. Shortages and equitable access to teachers are, for me, one work. And the reason is that progression that we're talking about in this slide that we're looking at. We know that teachers are the most important within school factor for student achievement. And we know that a diverse workforce improves outcomes for all students. So because the workforce is currently predominantly white, it is those white students that have the benefit of those areas of effectiveness as we're talking about when we're talking about diversifying the workforce, which is raising student achievement, which is equitable assignment to disciplinary issues, which is equitable assignment to gifted and talented programs, avoiding implicit bias, all the things that good teachers do. Diverse workforce will do them better and benefit all students. And for that reason, when we're talking about improving access to good teachers, we're talking about diversifying the teacher workforce, and we're seeing both of these issues go hand in hand in our work. This tool that I'm going to present today, we've released a very early version of it in early 2019. And since then, we've been working with states and districts across the country. And you see some of them are in the dark blue. Dark blue here are represented every state that we know that at the state or at least the district experimented with the tool to some degree. Some of them done large TA projects with us. Some of them we just know that they've used it. And by the way, whenever I'm starting, and many times that I'm starting a TA project on this issue, I find out that states have already used that without us knowing. So if you're one of those states that have used it and you're in the light blue here, you can tell us in the chat that you've used the tool before. We'd love to hear. But we've had experience with some more intensive project with some states, and that experience have taught us some lessons around what states need with this new tool and how can we get it done. And that inspired the development of this new version of the tool. I could only present today a glimpse of it in the few minutes that I have. It has so many features, but I'll share some of the new ones. Hopefully, if you're interested, we're happy to engage with you further in a deeper conversation. At this point, I'd like to share, I'll leave the slides here for just a second and move to the Excel. Hopefully you can see it. Andrew, if you can give me a thumbs up there. Yeah, see it. The tool started as a diversity tool back in 2019. It is now a shortage tool, more general than diversity, but with a specific focus on diversity. And you'll hear from Betty in a second about how shortage work and work on recruitment and retention often results in a focus on diversity, given where the data is leading us. But the tool is inspired by our 3 guiding principles for doing work on addressing educator shortages. The first one, focus on the entire talent development framework. This image that we're seeing here in the Excel, that's the GTL Center Talent Development Framework. And it includes those 3 categories: attract, prepare, develop, support, and retain. And you see that kind of blurry lines between them that represent the fact it's not different categories, they're really one. When we're talking about, when we want to address shortages, we have to think about the entire continuum. Teachers leave classrooms because of working conditions issues that their peers who are thinking to become teachers know about and do not recruit for that reason. Teachers leave classroom because they were ill prepared and feel like they are not good at their job. We have to think about the entire continuum of the pipeline if we want to really address shortages. The second guiding principle that always leads us is disaggregating as much as we can and avoiding these big statements. A state is missing 10,000 teachers, because we know that's not really true. Or the statement that we see here, that state X is a chemistry teacher for every 400 students, where in reality, state X is a chemistry teacher for every 100 students in affluent schools, almost no shortage, and a qualified chemistry teacher for every 2,000 students. In high need schools, almost complete shortage. That's a much more nuanced representation of the data. It's going to help focus us where we need to focus, and the tool helps us to do that. And the third guiding principle focuses on a ready framework. After we know where we need to do this work, we want to make sure we tailor the strategies to accommodate their unique circumstances that are often not that easy. As the ready framework suggests to us, it's a large framework that we won't get into today, but that's what that framework suggests. At this point, I want to quickly jump back to the slides and send a question to you all. Let me move back here. Here we are. And we would love to hear from you. Actually, we'll open a survey and would like to see which areas of the pipeline did your state focus its shortage and diversity work. Is it recruitment to the profession? Is it teacher preparation? Or is it the development, support, and retention? I'm going to give you a minute to answer and see. Okay. So we're seeing, I think, a lot of focus on the recruitment to the profession, a little bit less on the support and retention to teachers, and then a little bit less on teacher preparation, I'm seeing. I think we can close the poll now. Looks like, hopefully you can see the results, look like a nice mix, but mostly a focus on the recruitment. I think the message that one of the messages we're trying to bring is we want to focus on the entire continuum, and B, we want to use the tool to see where in the pipeline is the shortage driven, and really do strategies that reflect that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Let me go back to the tool here. So we talked about our 3 guiding principles, and I'm going to go to the data input page where we put our state or district or school data. And the data input is inspired by those same guiding principles. If we're going to look at the rows here, The rows that use our talent development framework, attract, prepare, develop, support, retain. They include all of the categories that we can think of, all the way from wanting to become teachers, finishing high school, wanting to become teachers, all the way to retention. Have all those categories. And then the columns, they represent our need to disaggregate. So we're going to want to know how many teachers we have at each point in the pipeline by race, by gender, by subject, by program, by low performing schools versus others, by urban versus rural schools, by low income schools versus others, to really know where the problem is. And that's what our tool does, is we put numbers, and I've inputted some. We get this first kind of introductory chart that the tool does to us. It just shows us how our workforce declines as we go from one step to the other, and gives us a first impression of the shortage. There's nothing unique about that to teaching. Every profession is going to have that decline. What's unique is the inequality. That's why we're breaking the data, to try and understand who experiences this more than others. I'm just going to show one chart, which is the chart that focuses on race, that Betty is going to show later. So this is mock data. This is not real data. And it's data collection is difficult, but this tool is designed for difficult data circumstances. It's designed for SEAs, for LEAs, and it's designed for missing data. And we worked with this tool with states and districts that had 2 data points and others that had 20 data points. And you'd be surprised in the amount of insights that you could get at both types of scenarios. But what this chart shows us, based on the number of teachers that we have, white and BIPOC at every category that we have data for, it helps us see which steps in the pipeline are responsible for creating gaps, as opposed to just inheriting gaps that were there before. Places where we've inherited gaps are not places where we necessarily want to focus. We want to focus on those areas that create gaps. For example, in this chart, we're seeing, I'm going to the 3rd point from the right. The top line is white and the bottom purple line is BIPOC. And we're seeing that post-secondary enrollment in this imaginary state is 56% white and 44% BIPOC. But who chose teaching? There we see a huge difference. When we look at who chose teaching, 88% white and 13% non-white. And some of those other categories that are coming after that inherit that gap. So we know that there's that point in the pipeline. By the way, it's connected to working conditions and retention, because they don't choose teaching for a reason. But that part of the pipeline we know is a problem for us, and that's where we want to focus. And this has been something we've created to the first tool because we've seen errors in places that focus their work on places that inherited gaps. For example, if you want to focus on your hiring, because your hiring for schools is predominantly white, but maybe that hiring is proportionate, just takes a pool that is already almost exclusively white, and you got to focus on the pool, not on the hiring practices themselves. This tool helps you do that. But as we were doing this work, we started to notice another issue, and that's part of what the new feature of the tools actually include. So I'm going to go back to the slide here, and the issue has to do with where to prioritize this work. And it was interesting to see your answers from the first poll around that. We're wanting to think together with you and show you kind of how the tool can help you on this question of where we should do this work first. Where is it most urgent? So how do we choose where to focus our diversity work? We have here 2 imaginary districts, Jefferson City and Adamstown, not referring to any real cities with that name. Jefferson City, let's imagine a more kind of urban center with 75% of the students being BIPOC, similar to Lansing, by the way, and 50% of the teachers being BIPOC. Whereas in Adamstown, 25% of the students are and 5% of the teachers are. So where should we prioritize this work? The first most common approach that people take, the districts and state take, is to see who has the highest rates of students of color. And that would be Jefferson City with 75% of the students. And that's a very common way that people do it. The second way is to look at the differences between the students of color and teachers of color. Okay, so in Jefferson City, we have a 25 percentage point gap, 75 versus 50. And in Adamstown, we have 20 percentage point gap, 25 versus 5. So in both of these cases, we would choose Jefferson City. As we've seen in much of our work across the country, states choose Jefferson City first to prioritize this work. But we want to offer a different approach. And this approach is based on a study by Hansen and Quintero from the Brookings Institution, that they suggest we should look instead at the ratio between teachers and students, or students to teachers. And the ratio is going to tell us, it's going to answer us the question of which students are least likely to meet a teacher that shares their race. Not what is the biggest difference, but which students are least likely to meet a teacher that shares their race. When we look at the ratio, we actually have a strong preference for Adamstown here as a priority for this work. Because in Jefferson City, the ratio is 1.5. It's a small ratio. That's because half of the teachers are BIPOC teachers, and students are almost certainly going to meet teachers who share their race. Whereas in Adamstown, according to these cutoffs that were suggested by that same research, that's a ratio of above 4, which means a very large ratio, which means students in Adamstown are extremely unlikely to ever meet teachers who share their race. The tool, I'm going to very, very briefly show you. Actually, let me say one more thing. The BIPOC students in Adamstown are potentially more vulnerable for the types of biases that we're trying to address when we talk about diversifying the teacher workforce. Because when the research shows us, there's a citation, the research shows us that when BIPOC students are fewer in number, when they represent more of a minority, they are more vulnerable to these types of implicit bias. If you're talking about 2 Black students in a white classroom, that's different from a classroom that is predominantly Black, for example. And for that reason, those students in Adamstown may be more vulnerable. So what we've designed for you is this feature in the tool that's going to help us prioritize where to do this work. And I'm going to try and show it as quickly as I can because we're very short on time. I'm looking at another data input page here. Oh, sorry, I didn't switch back to the Excel. Let me switch back. I'm looking at another data input page here. And that allows me to choose a state. Right now I chose Delaware, and to choose whether I want to focus on district or school level. If I switch to school, I'm going to get at the bottom a list of schools. I'm going to go to district, I'm getting the list of districts in Delaware. And using federal data, it's going to tell me the rate of BIPOC students in that state. And by the way, you can override that data if you have better data than the one that is presented here. You can just put different data. And what it asks us is to write the rate of teachers that are BIPOC. So I'm going to put 20% in one, 80% in another, 2% in another. As I'm doing that, it creates this ratio for me and tells me which districts have the highest ratio. I can go to the next tab. I'm going to actually get a prioritization table here. It's going to tell me where do I need to do first, the work first. And if I chose schools, it's going to add schools here as well. I can choose schools and districts. It's going to add both of them together. And it's going to tell me, well, this district is a priority. But within that district, we should really focus on that school because that school is students that are unlikely to meet teachers of color. That is, in a nutshell, kind of that new addition. We have others as well. I don't want to take too much time with that. I'll just say one last thing as I'm transitioning back the slide and handing it to my colleagues. The tool is only the very, very first step in doing this work. And we're following the work on the quantitative tool with a qualitative effort of trying to understand why teachers are leaving or why teachers are not coming in the first place. In my opinion, the qualitative effort is even more important. But the strength of the tool is to ground us in facts and data around where are we losing teachers, where might the disparity be, and where should we really prioritize this work. We're going to have time for questions in a little bit, but as we transition, I invite you to write in the chat whether you've used data in a similar way in the past, and whether you think that using it that way could be potentially useful for you. One of the places where we did use the tool was Lansing. It's a project that the GTL Center has done with collaboration with Rail Midwest, focused on recruitment and retention in general, not just diversity, but we ended up with a focus on diversity. And Betty led the work from the Lansing side. And I want to introduce Betty Underwood, a consultant to Lansing Public Schools. And Betty, I'll transfer it to you.
Thank you, Itai. I appreciate that introduction and your great explanation of the work that we have started with you. Lansing is a district of about 11,000 students. We are, as Itai said, above 76% of our students are BIPOC students in Lansing. We have students from 73 countries and 59 language groups. So we have a very diverse student population. In 2017, we were awarded a Teacher School Leader grant, and that Teacher School Leader Rewarding Educator Achievement and Performance was the title of it. There were two interconnected components, one quality supports for educators, and the other was to create a comprehensive HCMS or human capital management system with a focus on recruitment, onboarding, placement, retention, and promotion of teachers. We've been very fortunate to work with AIR and the GTL Center and a data-driven, stakeholder engaged approach. We started talking about this in December of 2019, and then actually began the formal process with our first group and looking at our data and disaggregating our data in May of 2020. Through the grant, we hired a specialist in our HR department to help work on those processes that were needed at the human resources area, in the human resources area. We had a lot of challenges when we started. We have a very, very small HR department. It took a lot of time pulling all the data together. We had data in many different systems, as I'm sure many of you can relate to, how, you know, some of it is in paper, some of it's archived, some of it is electronic, or in systems that don't talk to each other. And that was one of the goals of the program, of the grant, to help consolidate all that and make it a little bit better. So we started putting that together into usable form. Of course, COVID was around at that time, and that made a little bit more difficult process. We also were changing leadership in the school district, but now we know pretty much what we have and what we need to gather. We looked at many of these types of data that you see here on the screen. We've pulled it together. We've even collected more data since we looked at that. We found that as we brought our group together a focus group together to discuss and to analyze the data, we pulled in teachers, we had administrators, principals, central administrators, our teacher union president, our president of the administrator union, and to sit down and talk about what we wanted to do, how we wanted to analyze this data. And through the GTL Center, we were able to have a great process to do this. As we look at this, we used the data tool in Lansing, and we found while 76% of our students in Lansing are BIPOC, the entire teacher career pipeline is disproportionately white starting at college. As you can see this, this is a huge issue for us. As Itai mentioned earlier, some of the reasons for this, with people going into education, people leaving education, people not feeling comfortable, people not being supported, many of those issues. We also found that there was a 46 percentage point gap between the rate of BIPOC students and teachers in Lansing. As you can see, our breakdown of our students here. And as we went through and we looked at this, we came up with some key findings. And I'd like to give you just a second to maybe read down through some of those. And perhaps I'll focus on the second one. The diversity of the teacher workforce doesn't match the diversity of the population. We want our kids to be able to be with teachers who are like themselves. And it's unfortunate that we don't have that. We have that big gap. And so we're trying to find ways to support that. Our next step was to uncover root causes. And as we went through a root cause process, and you can imagine, I mean, many of you have done root cause mapping before not in a virtual situation, but our group supported us in taking us through that system in a virtual situation because we weren't able to meet together. So we met together to identify some of these statements. We found that teachers aren't adequately prepared, schools lack effective structures, minority teachers are negatively impacted by implicit bias. There are inconsistent systems. Teachers of color are not seeing opportunities to advance into leadership positions, and teachers feel a lack of support in their buildings. We really wanted to focus on those areas. Those were some of the things that our group came up with. As we looked at those areas, the GTL Center brought in strategies, research-based strategies that have been proven, evidence-based that have been proven that work. And we reviewed some of those. And we looked at things that might work in Lansing and might not work in Lansing to help us spark ideas in our development of an action plan. Our next session really revolved around that action planning process. We looked at all of these areas. We looked at strategies and we looked at what problems that strategy would address. And are we implementing this or a similar strategy? And we talked about that. And we were implementing some things that we've just started implementing in the last couple of years because of the grant, like a new teacher network, onboarding for our new teachers, mentors for our teachers, PLCs for our new teachers. We also looked at what stakeholders would be involved. Who would we get? Who would be the key people that we needed to have on board? And what was the priority? And what resources would be needed? Money, time, personnel, and what would be the level of impact? We talked about all of those things in that action planning session. Our next session, we applied the READY framework. We looked at the resources. We looked at the educator supports to identify what some of the problems and what some of the solutions could be. We pulled together a smaller group of key people. We decided that large group of, I believe we had 19, 20 people to start with. We decided we need some of the decision makers involved. So we pulled in a couple other people, assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, our school improvement director. We pulled in our union leaders again, and we sat down during this time and we applied the READY framework. We looked at a Jamboard approach again. We looked at the problems, which you see in yellow there, and then some of the solutions. We looked at, we took about an hour and a half probably to work on this and to sit down in small groups and to talk about this. And some of the things that we came up with was that we really, number one, we really needed a communication plan with whatever we do. Number two, we needed to build trust among everyone in the district. And because that was one of the things that surfaced many times about that trust factor of people not feeling comfortable, new teachers not knowing where to go to get things, teachers leaving because they didn't feel they were trusted or they didn't feel that they were supported in the buildings. So that was our process. Our next steps, we're meeting again in late August or early September to begin the actual action planning process, to take a look at those items, take a look at the teacher evaluation tool and how does that support lack of trust in the district. And so we're excited to continue with the work with that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Betty, for sharing that. And I'm sure there are multiple ones of you out there who have questions about the approach they use in Lansing. So feel free to jot those down, or you could even put them in the chat box now if you'd like, and we'll be sure to get to those within the next 10, 15 minutes or so. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Jamie Wilson, who is the Director of Human Resources for Reynoldsburg City Schools. And I'd like to give just a brief introduction of Jamie. I actually have the good fortune of working with her in collaboration with the Region 8 Comprehensive Center in Ohio. And what we're doing is considering Ohio one of our early implementers. We actually started working with them in 2019. And what we're doing right now is we started with the state, and now we're working with actual individual districts within the state. And we're conducting what we call regional diversity labs, where we take a set of school districts, and we conduct diversity labs going through this exact approach that Betty just mentioned that we went through with them in Lansing. And Jamie's cohort is actually on their third session right now, and she's going to share a little bit with you about what they are doing in Reynoldsburg. So Jamie, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Andrea, for that introduction. You crossed off, I could cross off my notes in the beginning of mine just because of what you said. But I appreciate, Betty, some insight into what you gave, because we are just starting. And so we're only on our third session. And it was really just great to see. I wrote down some notes on how you work that through to your action planning. So thank you for that help. So first, I kind of just want to start off with, we created a district-wide strategic plan where we were focusing on, in our student experience portion of that, diversifying our staff. And so this was work that we started about 1.5 years ago, just recognizing the importance of representation within our staff so that our students feel represented, and that we work to increase our staff of color. And so I'm just going to highlight some areas of kind of the backstory. We almost are working backwards a little bit, but still moving ahead at the same time. So our area within the HR department is specific to recruitment, development of processes and systems that would allow capacity and continue to build on that. So those are the areas that I'm going to kind of highlight and still talk about the work that we're doing with GTL, just as we are entering into our third session. So talking about our district, just giving you a little background to our district. Reynoldsburg is just east of Columbus, Ohio. We are about 8,000 students with 15 schools. And within our school population, we have 70% of our students are BIPOC, and specifically 38% of those students are Black and 15% Asian. So we are pretty diverse, and looking at our staff, there are definitely gaps. When we look at our staff, we are 86% white and 5% Black. There are about almost 10%, 7% of our staff that did not identify their race, so there is a little gap there. It was a 62% gap in our parity report. So students or our staff, non-white staff, and our BIPOC population of students is a 62% gap. So we definitely know that the gaps exist. Our problem is, where do you go? Where do you start with this? You know, we see that there's a disparity. Now what? And so moving forward, what GTL has really helped us identify our barriers in our historical data, and then how do we move forward, even though we don't have, and I think Betty touched on this, even though we don't have a good minority hiring funnel I don't have the data to create that. So what do I do? That was one of the biggest barriers that we recognized early on in our sessions with GTL. So what we decided to do is we're still going to move forward, but I think we're going to start a little bit with our qualitative data and then move forward. I'm trying to figure out systems now that we can create a better minority hiring funnel. So we partnered with Ohio Department of Education. We actually granted an award for diversifying the education profession. We just were granted that just this year. And so we almost have this merge that we're trying to do and move forward with GTL and use leverage the grant opportunities so that we can continue progressing while we also identify our systems. So we partnered with Battelle for Kids within that grant to develop an action plan to move forward and working with identifying what our students look like, what our staffs look like, and trying to merge those so that we use the data from our diversity labs and root cause analysis and move forward with the grant. So really it kind of came simultaneously. And how do you juggle all those things and continue to move forward where everyone is on the same team? So we developed a diversity task force, similar to what Betty talked about with administration, teachers, community members, support staff. We too have our union president on that. And then we identified some areas that we'd like to focus on and brought those to our GTL sessions. We really utilized the problem statement session that we just had. We really worked through that and had some dynamic conversations about, well, what is the problem and what can we start with? So what we identified as our problem first that we'd like to at least look at while we build the capacity to build better data with our candidate selection is that we're not selecting applicants of color because we do not have a coherent recruiting plan. You know, who's hiring? Do they know what they're looking for? Do we know what our ideal educator looks like? Are we all consistent with those? Can be a huge reason why we're not able to hire a diverse staff. And so we identified some areas and root causes. We used that worksheet that was provided from GTL and identified our recruiting practices are not diverse enough to reach a diverse population. District branding is a concern that might have implicit biases in our branding that we would like to take a look at. We are developing state interviews because we too want to know, does our staff of color trust us? Why aren't they staying? Why are they staying? What makes our district appealing to our diverse population within the district now? We're also looking at where do we recruit? Are we being intentional about recruiting and who we are advertising open positions for? All those things have really not been addressed. And so we started with that problem of practice first since our qualitative data is thin. So I want to encourage you, if you are having problems with, we don't even ask our applicants what their ethnicity is or what their race is. It's not even a question on our applicant process. But what that did do is elicit some conversation with our legal to talk about how can we get those questions onto our application process. So that's not even data that we've even talked about creating, but now that we've gone through these GTL sessions, it definitely is something that we would like to draw from. So we have that in process right now with our legal team, because obviously some of you can attest there might be some issues, legality with asking that question on our application about what is your race. So we're working through some of those barriers, but at the same time, still trying to move forward with saying our whole process, we don't even have a good solidified plan for hiring and recruiting that includes diversity within it. So let's start there. We're developing a portrait of an educator. We already have a portrait of a grad. And so what does our portrait of an educator look like? And starting with that, we move forward then to conducting stay interviews, which I touched on. And then focusing on our recruitment materials. Our communications director is part of our diversity team, so that she can work with us on how we're branding ourselves. All those things are moving parts, which we're trying to do in this first year and move forward. So our whole goal as a diversity team is no matter what, we're going to move forward. We're not going to keep stating the problem. We're not going to keep talking about what we don't have, but instead we're going to create action plans and move it forward. So kind of moving while we're creating these systems in place that can help us build capacity.
All right. Did you want to add something else, Jamie?
Nope, that's okay.
Okay. That was great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jamie, very much for that presentation. And thank you also, Betty. And I know that there are those of you who have questions that you'd like to pose to them, or questions that you might perhaps want to pose to Itai about the data tool. And so we welcome you to do that now. If you could just place your question in the chat, I will be happy to take a look at it and share it with the entire group. So now is a good time to do that. Questions for Betty, Jamie, or even Itai?
As people are writing their questions, let me also add that, as I was saying earlier, this is very much in a nutshell. There's the tip of the iceberg in terms of, the work, the process, the tool, but then also the process that follows the tool. And as I was saying earlier, would be delighted to meet individually with anyone that is interested. Our contact information was earlier. It will be there again in a minute. And just let you know that's a possibility. And of course, answer any questions that you have right now.
Okay, we have one question. Does the process tie to student outcomes at any point? Itai, you want to take that?
It's a great question. Thank you for answering it. This particular process focuses on the inputs more than it does on the outcomes. Inputs that we know that research ties to student outcomes. And it is designed to do that because we think that too often we just look at the student outcomes. We just look at the final product that we're not happy about, those devastating gaps. And we're not looking enough at those inputs that create those gaps. Those gaps are not natural. They're created by discriminatory policies and practices that we take every day. And for that reason, the tool focuses, laser focus on those inputs. Of course, it provides the opportunity to tie to student outcomes. For example, the system that ranks districts based on where this work is needed most, we could compare it easily to where we see the most significant race-based gaps. And then we see a correlation between the chance of meeting a teacher that shares your race and race-based gaps. So there's definitely the opportunity to do that. But we deliberately focused on the input so we could understand our mechanisms better before we go and analyze the outcomes. That's a great question. The student outcomes are obviously what we want to focus on.
Excellent. We have another question from Holly Eden. Itai, can you please repeat what you said earlier about the inherited gaps?
Yes. I won't try to pull the visual now. I'll just explain it. What I was saying is that a lot of the times we look at a particular point in the pipeline. Let's say we look at hiring. And we say that the district in the last year hired 8 white teachers and 2 black teachers. And we'll say that there is bias in hiring for that reason. But if we were to use the tool, maybe we would have seen that the pipeline included 80 white candidates and 20 black candidates, and the hiring was perfectly proportionate. The district could have done more to try and diversify and be disproportionate in order to diversify towards BIPOC teachers, but discrimination in hiring is not the root cause of that inequality. So the tool helps us identify that's not where gaps are created. Those are gaps that are inherited. gaps are created in our particular district, for example, in the licensure test. And we see that there, the test makes for a pool of candidates that is much less diverse. So we know we have a problem with that test. That's what I'm talking about, the difference between inherited gaps and those areas that actually create the gaps. I hope that clarifies.
Great, thanks, Itai. And I also want to note that our colleague Jessica Giffen, who will be directing our third webinar in this series, has mentioned that the GIS mapping, some of you may be familiar with that, will explore shortages based on school and district performance. And that's something that we'll go into a bit more on webinar 3. All right, let's see. We have a few other questions here. Betty and Jamie, what has been the most challenging part of the process thus far that each of your districts have gone through? Betty, we'll start with you. Most challenging part of the process thus far?
I think keeping the momentum going. This has been, as we all know, it's really been a challenging year and a half. And our district has never gone back in person to in-person learning. We've been virtual all year. And keeping the momentum going, keeping people engaged, being able to have the conversations with people and not being in the offices with them, I think has been a real challenge. Even though they think it's important, they feel it's really key, but we haven't been able to do business as usual. So it'll be interesting when we start this year and we go on and we start to put our plan in place and start our action plan and our communication plan. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm sure it'll go much better.
Absolutely. We'll stay tuned.
Yeah.
And Jamie?
I think the barriers in our data collection, because you want to make data-driven decisions, and sometimes you focus a lot on that quantitative data, and so then the qualitative data, narrowing it down and making sure that we are intentional and focused, and not having like this many things of root causes to focus on, and then not starting and tackling any of them. So that has been the most difficult for us as a team.
All right.
One point to add on that, I think is very important, that often we see in the field, this work on analyzing the data, the goal of it is not to publish a paper in the Harvard Educational Review. The goal is to help kids. And at some point, despite the data difficulties and challenges, we got to say, okay, we built the best picture we can. This is what we know about the workforce. Let's move on to talk about the root causes and strategies. Too often, we're seeing this overemphasis on the quantitative data and how we make that happen. One of the things we're trying to do when we're supporting states and districts is move on. This is what we know. This is the picture of inequality, of disparities. Now, what do we want to do? I think that's a very important thing to do.
I agree. And Jamie, you guys are a great example of a district who's doing exactly that, which is wonderful. I have another question. Is this work that a district can do in partnership with a regional center? And the answer to that is yes. In fact, in Ohio, we are working with the Region 8 Center to collaborate with the Ohio Department of Education, and through them, local districts in Ohio. Itai, or our partners, Betty and Jamie, how are you working with university teacher education program partners to create intentional pipelines of diverse teachers?
We've had partnerships, obviously, with student teacher placements. And what I've been doing is asking, what is the demographics of your student teacher population? And just explain to them what our goals are. The numbers are low in our area for students of color in the teaching profession. And so being intentional about looking for historically Black colleges around in our area to see if we can partner so that we can have some student placements with them. And then really just letting colleges and universities know what our goals are. I don't think we have been intentional about actually stating that to them. It's been helpful as they have been doing the same thing. So partnering with them, and then also developing a grow your own. So we do have an academy that focuses on business leadership and education in our high schools. And so right now we're trying to build a pipeline with our high school students where if they're in that academy, we can look to provide them with a scholarship of some sort to encourage them to go through the entire teaching profession at their universities and then come back for some sort of interview, immediate interview, or some way to engage them so that it's worth their while to come back into our school district.
We're doing some of those same things. We have are now starting Grow Your Own with our high school students. The same type of thing that you're doing. We have a very strong partnership with Michigan State. And in fact, the director of teacher education is on the committee that our small group committee and our large group committee that we work with, as well as several other universities in the area.
Great. That actually segues into a question we have from Jennifer Robinson, who's asking, have you been able to establish Grow Your Own programs with university partners, given the population of BIPOCs in your district? Jamie, do you guys have further? Betty, either one of you.
Yeah.
Grow Your Own programs.
Go ahead, Jamie.
We have just really engaged in conversations with universities. There's 2 universities that we're working with to try to create the Grow Your Own. What we need is a way to scholarship, which we're going to look for another grant for that part because we would like to support students in some sort of way to make sure that they go to that university. So working with the university to see if they offer any monies for us or something that can benefit the student. Also are classified. So in our data, I don't know, we have a higher population of BIPOCs in our classifieds. And so how can we support any classified staff, paraprofessional, teachers aide who are interested in finishing? Sometimes they have already started a teacher program and have not finished, and trying to engage with how can we support you in finishing to get your teaching certification?
We also have a connection with with a university and a college within the city that is working very closely with us to help support some of those scholarships as well. But that's an issue, the funding. How do you find funds to support that kind of thing?
And let me add one more piece. I know we're almost at time on this question of the higher ed institutions. One of the beautiful things we've seen in the work in Ohio that we started a couple of years ago is that the process and that image that you've seen in the tour that goes all the way through higher ed to retention, hiring, retention, it sends the message that anyone can own those gaps, everyone can close the gaps. It's not your fault or your fault, it's your fault, it's everybody's fault. And it's everybody's opportunity. And when we were in the room, you could see the gaps everywhere and how the line grow, and in some places that are good, people say, okay, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. And people contribute data and can contribute the solution. So hopefully using this approach, you can recruit the higher education institution teacher preparation programs to this work jointly with the district. They will do the hiring, you do the retention, and work together to try and diversify.
Okay, we have just 1 minute left. So what we're going to do is remind you of our session 3 that will be coming up next week, actually, August 3rd from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be digging into GIS mapping in that particular session, and it's sure to be a treat. So we invite you to join us then. We want to thank you so much for coming today, and we hope that you learned a lot from our partners here. And again, I want to thank Itai, I want to thank Betty and Jamie for sharing your expertise with us and sharing your experience with us. And we look forward to seeing everyone next week during the 3rd and final part of this series. Thank you so much for attending.